Hello and welcome. I have to be honest with you from the very start. I wasn't sure we should even have this conversation. Some stories are so personal, so raw, that putting them out into the world feels intrusive. But then I thought about the silence. And how, sometimes, silence can be more damaging than the truth. How it allows rumors to fester, lies to spread, and pain to grow in the dark. So, we're going to talk. We're going to talk about a family that many of you feel you know. We're going to talk about Matt Roloff. Now, if you're a fan of the show, you just got a picture in your head. The charismatic, stubborn, endlessly optimistic patriarch of Little People, Big World. The man with the grand visions, the twinkle in his eye, and the sheer force of will to turn a simple farm into an empire. You're thinking of the Matt Roloff who drives tractors, builds castles in the air, and sometimes on the ground, and who has faced a lifetime of physical challenges with a smirk and a plan. But that's not the Matt Roloff we're talking about tonight. The man at the center of this story is in a hospital bed. And he is very, very sick. The news broke in the way these things often do, a vague post from a family friend, a hushed comment in a local store, then a frantic flurry of messages between fans online. The official statements, when they finally came, were, "Careful. Too careful. Matt is dealing with a serious health issue and is receiving treatment." The family asks for privacy at this difficult time. It was the kind of corporate speak that sends a chill down your spine because you know the reality behind it is anything but clean and corporate. It's messy. It's frightening. It's the sound of a monitor beeping in a quiet room. And surrounding that hospital bed are two women. Two women whose lives have been inextricably, and often controversially, linked to this man. His ex-wife, Amy. And his fiancée, Caryn. You've seen the dynamics play out on your screens for years. The complicated dance of a blended family, a shared business, a legacy. You've seen the laughter, the arguments, the tense negotiations over pumpkin season. But what you're seeing now, what's happening behind the closed doors of that hospital wing, is something different entirely. This isn't about the farm. This isn't about a TV show. This is about life and death. And in this high-stakes, high-pressure environment, every crack in every relationship is being forced wide open. But before we get into the heart of this story, before we talk about the tears, the fears, and the shocking confrontations that have already taken place, I need to tell you something. I need to give you the twist right now, at the beginning, because it changes everything you think you know about this situation. Ready? The cause of Matt's hospitalization wasn't an accident. It wasn't a sudden, unforeseen illness that struck out of the blue. The truth is, Matt's current critical condition is the direct result of a conscious decision he made. A decision he made weeks ago, in secret, against the explicit and desperate pleas of both Amy and Caryn. He stopped his treatment. He looked his doctors in the eye, he looked at the women who love him, and he decided to walk away from the very protocol that was keeping him stable. He chose to roll the dice with his life. And the reason he did it is the key to understanding everything that is happening right now. Let that sink in. This isn't just a tragedy, it's a choice. And the fallout from that choice is tearing his world apart. So, let's rewind. Let's go back to the beginning of this crisis, before the hospital, before the desperate phone calls, to a time when the biggest problem on the Roloff farm was probably a stubborn pumpkin. For years, those of us watching from the outside have known that Matt's health is a constant battle. Dwarfism comes with its own set of complex medical challenges, and Matt has faced them with a warrior spirit. But there was one issue, a persistent one related to his musculoskeletal system, that had been causing him more and more trouble. The pain was becoming a constant companion. His mobility was decreasing. The vibrant, always in motion Matt Roloff was being slowly, inexorably, grounded. His doctors presented him with an option. A new, aggressive treatment. It was invasive. It came with significant risks and a brutal recovery period. But the potential payoff was a new lease on life. Less pain, more freedom. For a man like Matt, whose entire identity is built on action and creation, It must have sounded like a miracle. But miracles have a price. Both Amy and Caryn, from their very different positions in his life, were terrified. Amy, the mother of his children, the woman who stood by him through decades of health struggles, knew the toll this would take. She'd seen him at his weakest. She'd nursed him through recoveries. She knew the Matt behind the camera, the one who was frustrated, in pain, and human. Her fear was born of experience, of a long, shared history of sickness and health. Caryn, his partner in this new chapter, the woman who represents his future, was equally terrified, but for different reasons. She fell in love with the vibrant, charismatic visionary. She's built a life with him based on travel, projects, and a hard-won peace after the tumult of his divorce. This treatment, this gamble, threatened to shatter that future. Her fear was for the life they had built, for the man she knew, and for the terrifying possibility of losing him just as they were about to officially start their lives together as husband and wife. Despite their fears, they rallied. They became an unlikely united front. Amy, from her home just across the farm, offered her support, her knowledge of his medical history, her help with the kids. Caryn, by his side, became his primary caregiver, his advocate, his rock. For a brief, shining moment, the old tension seemed to melt away in the face of a common enemy, Matt's declining health. The treatment began. And it was every bit as hard as they feared. There were good days, where Matt would crack a joke from his hospital bed, talking about new ideas for the farm. And there were bad days, very bad days, where the pain was so overwhelming he could barely speak. Through it all, Amy and Caryn maintained a fragile truce. They coordinated visits. They updated each other. They shared the burden. But then, something shifted. About 6 weeks into the treatment, Matt hit a wall. The pain was relentless. The confinement was chipping away at his spirit. The powerful medications fogged his brilliant mind. He couldn't think clearly. He couldn't plan. He was, in his own eyes, trapped. And for Matt Roloff, there is no fate worse than being trapped. It was during one of these dark nights, with Caryn asleep in the chair next to him, that he made his decision. He later told a close friend that he looked around the sterile room, felt the tubes and wires connecting him to the machines, and he didn't see a path to life. He saw a prison. He saw the very essence of his independence being systematically dismantled. And the man who built a farm from nothing, who defied every expectation placed on him, decided he would not go out this way. He decided to stop. He informed his doctors the next morning. The medical team was appalled. They pleaded with him. They explained, in the clearest, most graphic terms, what would happen. That stopping mid-protocol wasn't just pausing, it was triggering a catastrophic chain reaction. His body, already weakened and relying on the treatment, would not be able to cope. It would be, in their words, medical suicide. When Caryn found out, she collapsed. The strength she had so carefully curated for weeks evaporated in an instant. This wasn't just a setback, this was a rejection of the future they had planned, a dismissal of all the care and love she had poured into him. Her terror turned into a frantic, desperate campaign to change his mind. She brought in the children. Zach, Jeremy, Molly, Jacob, they all took turns, trying to reason with their father, to appeal to the fighter they all knew. But Matt was resolute. He had made up his mind. And then Caryn called Amy. Imagine that phone call. The woman who replaced her, calling her in a state of sheer panic, because the man they both loved, in their own, complicated ways, was intent on self-destruction. Amy's reaction was different from Caryn's. It wasn't just panic, it was a deep, resonant, and furious grief. She had spent over 30 years of her life fighting with Matt, fighting for Matt. She had endured the pain, the surgeries, the struggles, to build a life and a family. And to see him now, ready to throw it all away, for her, it felt like a betrayal of that entire shared history. It was as if he was saying that their past, the life they built together, wasn't worth fighting for anymore. She stormed into that hospital room. And the confrontation was epic. This wasn't a televised argument for the cameras. This was raw, unfiltered, and real. Amy, standing by his bed, didn't plead. She accused. She called him selfish. She told him he was so obsessed with controlling his own narrative, with being the great man who went out on his own terms, that he was blind to the carnage he was leaving behind. She brought up their children. She brought up their grandchildren. She asked him how he could be so willing to abandon them for the sake of his pride. Matt, weak but defiant, fired back. He told her she didn't understand. He said she never truly understood the pressure he was under, the weight of being the provider, the star, the patriarch. He threw their past in her face, accusing her of always trying to hold him back, to play it safe. He said this was his life, and his choice. And Caryn? Caryn was caught in the middle, watching the two most important people in her life, her fiancé and his ex-wife, tear each other apart over the man lying in the bed between them. Her attempts to mediate, to calm the waters, were shouted down by both of them. In that moment, she was rendered invisible, a spectator to a decades-old war that had just found a new, and more devastating, battlefield. Amy finally left the room, tears of rage and heartbreak streaming down her face. The truce was not just broken, it was annihilated. 2 days later, exactly as the doctors predicted, Matt's body began to fail. It was swift and brutal. He was rushed back to the hospital, this time in critical condition. The choice he had made had now become a full-blown medical crisis. The very catastrophe they had all been warned about was now unfolding. And this is where we are now. This is the present moment. Matt is in the ICU. His condition is stable, but grave. The doctors are fighting a new battle, not to cure him, but simply to manage the cascading failures his decisions set in motion. And the two women? They are shattered. But their grief is manifesting in profoundly different, and opposing, ways. Caryn is stationed at the hospital. She barely leaves. She is his defender, his gatekeeper. Her grief is turned inward, into a fierce, protective shell. She speaks to the doctors, she filters the information going to the family, she maintains a vigil. She is, in her mind, honoring his choice, even as it destroys her. She is living the nightmare she feared, and there is a part of her that is deeply, profoundly angry with Matt for putting her here. But she can't show that, not now. So, she bottles it up, and the pressure is building. Amy, on the other hand, is a whirlwind of activity away from the hospital. She is with her children and grandchildren, trying to hold that part of their world together. Her grief is turned outward, into action. But beneath that action is a simmering, righteous fury. She believes Matt's stubbornness has created this mess, and she sees Caryn's unwavering support not as loyalty, but as an endorsement of his catastrophic decision. In Amy's eyes, Caryn should have fought harder. She should have done more. She enabled this. The phone calls have stopped. The coordination is over. We now have two separate camps, Team Caryn at the hospital, and Team Amy at the family homestead. And the chasm between them is wider and deeper than it has ever been. But here's the thing about a crisis like this, it doesn't just reveal cracks, it forges new alliances and unearths old secrets. Just yesterday, something happened. Something that changes the game yet again. Amy, desperate for any information, called Matt's primary doctor directly, bypassing Caryn completely. And during that conversation, the doctor, perhaps sensing the deep fracture in the family, let something slip. He mentioned, almost in passing, that one of the factors they were monitoring was a pre-existing condition, a vulnerability that Matt had had for years, long before this current treatment even began. A condition that was meticulously documented in his medical records from over a decade ago. A condition that, according to those records, Amy knew all about. But a condition that, apparently, Matt had never, ever told Caryn about. So, let's just pause here. Let's look at the chessboard. Matt is fighting for his life. Caryn is by his side, believing she is honoring his wishes, but operating without a key piece of information about his health. Amy is on the outside, armed with this decades-old knowledge, and now facing a monumental choice. Does she call Caryn? Does she share this secret that Matt deliberately kept from the woman he plans to marry? Does she break the confidence of a shared marital history that, for all its faults, was theirs? Or does she hold on to it, letting it fuel her resentment that Caryn never really knew the whole Matt, the way she did? This is no longer just a story about a sick man. This is a story about the secrets we keep, the loyalties we hold, and the devastating cost of love in all its forms. What happens when the person at the center of your universe makes a choice you cannot understand? What do you owe the person who replaced you? And what do you owe yourself? The battle for Matt Roloff's life is also a battle for his legacy, for the truth of his story, and for the souls of the two women he has left in this impossible, heart-shattering situation. And I can tell you this with absolute certainty, whatever happens next in that hospital, the Roloff farm, and the family that bears its name, will never, ever be the same again. We'll be watching. We'll be waiting. And we'll continue this conversation, right here, very soon. Until then, hold your loved ones close. Good night. Welcome back. When we left off, the situation surrounding Matt Roloff was not just a medical crisis, it had become a tinderbox of secrets, loyalties, and decades of unresolved history. Matt was in the ICU, his body failing as a direct result of his decision to stop his treatment. Caryn was maintaining a silent, angry vigil by his side, a guardian of the choice he made. And Amy, armed with a devastating piece of medical history that Matt had kept from Caryn, was standing at a moral crossroads. The question hanging in the air was simple and brutal: what does Amy do with this secret? Tonight, we follow that thread into the heart of the storm. Because the answer to that question didn't just create a ripple effect, it set off a chain reaction that would force everyone to confront who they are, what this family truly means, and what remains when the cameras are off and the only audience is your own conscience. Let's pick up the story exactly where we left it. Amy, standing in her kitchen, the phone still warm in her hand after her conversation with Matt's doctor. The doctor had mentioned, almost casually, the exacerbation of a chronic renal issue, a kidney condition that had been a quiet, managed part of Matt's health landscape for over 15 years. To Amy, this wasn't news. It was a chapter from her life. She remembered the doctor's appointments, the dietary changes, the subtle fatigue Matt would battle. It was woven into the fabric of their marriage, one of the many silent battles they'd fought together. But the doctor's tone had implied that this was a new, aggravating factor. Which could only mean one thing: Matt had never told Caryn. Think about that for a moment. Think about the weight of that omission. This man, planning to marry Caryn, building a future with her, had chosen to keep a significant, pre-existing condition a secret. Why? Pride? A desire to appear stronger, less vulnerable than he was? A refusal to let this new love be tinged with the same medical anxieties that had colored his old one? We may never know his true motivation. But the result was a fundamental asymmetry in his relationships. Amy held a piece of the map to Matt's well-being that Caryn didn't even know existed. And now, Amy was holding it alone. I've spoken to a source very close to Amy in the days since this happened, and they described her state of mind as a turbulent sea of conflicting emotions. First, there was a bitter, fleeting sense of vindication. See? A part of her thought. He didn't tell her everything. She doesn't know him like I did. She's living in a fantasy. This was the voice of the ex-wife, the voice of a hurt that had never fully healed. But that voice was quickly drowned out by another, louder one, the voice of the mother. The woman who raised 4 children with this man. This voice was concerned with one thing only: could this information help save him? If the doctors were now battling a renal crisis on top of everything else, wouldn't his full medical history be critical? This wasn't about her versus Caryn, this was about Matt's survival. For 24 hours, Amy was paralyzed by this decision. She didn't call Caryn. She didn't call the kids. She carried the secret like a live grenade, afraid that any movement would cause an explosion. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the atmosphere was shifting. Matt's condition, while stable, was not improving. The doctors were using words like multi-system organ failure and critical but stable. Caryn, who had been a pillar of quiet strength, began to crumble. The lack of progress, the relentless beeping of the machines, the sheer helplessness of it all was eroding her resolve. The anger she had bottled up, anger at Matt for his choice, at the situation for its cruelty, was starting to leak out. It manifested in small, sharp ways. She became short with the nurses. She stopped returning non-essential texts from the family. She was building a fortress around herself and Matt, and the walls were getting higher and more impenetrable. When Zach and Jeremy came to visit, they found the atmosphere in the waiting room thick with a tension they couldn't quite name. Caryn was polite, but distant. She was there, but she was gone. It was Jeremy, the more observant, less confrontational of the brothers, who first sensed that the problem was deeper than just fear for their father's health. He told his wife, Audrey, later that night that it felt like Caryn was guarding a tomb, not supporting a patient. She wasn't just waiting for Matt to get better, she was preparing for an outcome she had already, in her heart, accepted. And that acceptance felt like a betrayal to the sons who were still fiercely willing their father to fight. This is the fractured landscape into which Amy finally decided to step. She didn't call. She drove to the hospital. She knew a phone call could be ignored, dismissed, or turned into an argument. This required a face-to-face confrontation. She walked into that ICU waiting room, and found Caryn alone, staring out a window at a gray, rain-soaked afternoon. The source described the scene to me. Caryn turned, saw Amy, and her face immediately closed off. The guard was up. "Amy," she said, her voice flat. "What are you doing here?" Amy, according to the source, didn't mince words. There was no small talk. She said, "We need to talk. The doctors are fighting a kidney problem now, on top of everything else. It's making everything worse." Caryn sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. "I know. They told me. It's a complication from his body shutting down." And then Amy delivered the line that changed everything. She looked Caryn directly in the eye and said, "It's not a complication, Caryn. It's a pre-existing condition. He's had it for 15 years. The silence that followed was, I'm told, absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Caryn's face went through a rapid, devastating sequence of emotions. First, confusion. Then, dawning comprehension. And finally, a look of such profound, gut-wrenching betrayal that it was almost painful to witness. "What?" she whispered. Amy laid it out, calmly and clearly. The initial diagnosis. The long-term management. The fact that it had been stable for years, but was always a vulnerability. "I thought you knew," Amy finished, though the source admits this might not have been entirely true. It was a peace offering, a way to soften the blow. But the blow had already landed. Caryn took a step back, leaning against the window as if her legs could no longer support her. All the pieces were clicking into place in her mind. Matt's occasional, unexplained fatigue that he'd blame on stress. His stubbornness about certain foods. Little lies, little omissions, over the course of their entire relationship. She had thought they had no secrets. She was wrong. The foundation of her trust in him, the very rock on which she had built her life with him, had just developed a massive, irreparable crack. And then, the most unexpected thing happened. The anger she had been directing inward, and at the world, finally found its true target, Matt. And in a shocking twist, it forged a temporary, powerful alliance with the woman standing in front of her. "Why?" Caryn asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and fury. "Why wouldn't he tell me? Did he think I was too weak to handle it? Did he not trust me?" Amy, in that moment, was no longer the ex-wife. She was a fellow traveler on the difficult road of loving Matt Roloff. She said, "It wasn't about you, Caryn. It was about him. It was always about him. He couldn't stand being seen as weak or vulnerable. Not by the kids, not by the fans, and especially not by you. He needed to be